walking was obviously one of the only ways to get around. Can you imagine a daily trek? There weren't always roads to walk along, and when there was, they weren't always paved or clean like the roads we know today. In the country, one could step in mud, slip on wet spots, fall on sharp rocks, or have the misfortune of encountering a snake, or spiders. On the road, one still had mud and trails of dung left by people who could afford to ride. As you can imagine, actually reaching your destination was probably quite a relief, but it also leaves another problem. What does one do with their nasty, dirty, bloody, and stinky feet? The ancient world has an answer for this, found in many texts, but also in Genesis 18:4. Let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under a tree. It was common courtesy to provide water for guests to wash their feet with. The host could also offer a servant or slave to wash the traveler's feet for them. This is the scene we get today from our reading. Jesus and the disciples have been walking all day long through Jerusalem, which has a massive amount of people in it celebrating Passover. Crowds piling up around them, ritual slaughter of lambs going on, most likely in the temple, but maybe in honor of the Passover sprinkled on the doorway. And riders who obviously weren't sending people after them to pick up the horse, donkey, or mule droppings. So let that image sink in for a second. So when Jesus and the 12 finally arrive at the place that they're to stay, Jesus wants to give them one last example. He takes off his cloak and puts on a towel, changing his clothes into that of a servant. He goes on to wash these men's feet who have stepped in some nasty things, and wipes their feet off with a towel around his waist, essentially wearing their filthiness. Peter is obviously distressed by this. He knows what it means. He knows this isn't a proper role for his teacher, much less the Messiah. He argues with him, saying he should wash Jesus' feet. And Peter is right. As a student, he is of the lower social class, and he should be washing Jesus' feet. When Jesus says no, Peter asks for Jesus to wash the rest of him too, to avoid having Jesus degrade himself. Still, Jesus says no. After he washes the disciples' feet, Jesus changes his clothes again and comes back. Finally, he tells them the whole point. I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet. You also ought to wash one another's feet. But of course, Jesus wasn't only talking to the 12 sitting with him at that table that night. He was saying this for all his disciples throughout time. Otherwise, I wouldn't be saying it. Jesus has the audacity to say that no matter who you are, if you are his servant, you will lower and humble yourself as he has done. If you wish to follow Jesus, we must take up the role of a servant and do the things that seem so degrading, we would shudder at the thought of it, so we can help those who need it. Jesus then gives us a challenge. Whoever receives one whom I send receives me, and whoever receives me receives him who sent me. So I want you to think, what is your feet washing? What is the thing that God wants you to do to show your humility in a world so focused on social status? What will you do to help your neighbor with your own two hands, even when it's embarrassing to you in the process?